My name is Grace, and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, my father demanded I sell my apartment. Today, I'm standing in the penthouse he unknowingly helped me buy. Let me tell you how I discovered the truth about family loyalty. It started with a phone call that changed everything. My phone buzzed at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. Dad's name flashed on the screen. He never called this early unless something was wrong. "Grace, we need to talk." His voice was sharp, demanding. "I'm coming over in an hour." I barely had time to make coffee before he arrived. Dad walked into my small one-bedroom apartment like he owned it. His eyes scanned the space with disapproval I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "This place is too expensive for you," he announced. "You need to sell it and move somewhere cheaper." I stared at him. I'd been living here for 3 years. I'd saved every penny, worked double shifts at the marketing firm, skipped vacations to afford this place. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. "Dad, I can afford my mortgage," I said carefully. "I've never missed a payment." He waved his hand dismissively. "Your brother needs help with his new business venture. Family comes first, Grace." There it was, the real reason. My golden child brother Marcus needed money again. Dad expected me to sacrifice my stability for Marcus's 4th failed startup attempt. "I'm not selling my home," I said quietly but firmly. Dad's face turned red. "You're being selfish. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing decision, hit like and subscribe to Here. More real stories about family loyalty and betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. That conversation haunted me for days. I kept replaying his words. "After everything I've done for you." What exactly had he done for me? The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. I decided to do something I'd never done before. I started investigating my own family's financial history. What I discovered would shatter everything I believed about my place in this family. It began innocently enough. I was organizing old documents when I found a bank statement from 10 years ago. It showed a large deposit into my college fund. The amount was substantial, but what caught my attention was the source. The money hadn't come from Dad's account. It came from something called the Hartwell Family Trust. I'd never heard of any family trust. My parents always said they scraped together money for my education through hard work and sacrifice. I spent the next week digging deeper. I visited the bank, spoke with old family friends, and even hired a private investigator. The truth that emerged was staggering. My grandmother, who died when I was 8, had been wealthy, incredibly wealthy. She'd left a substantial inheritance, but not the way I'd always been told. The money wasn't divided equally among her children. She'd set up individual trusts for each grandchild. Marcus had his trust. I had mine. But here's where the story gets complicated. Dad had been managing both trusts since we were minors. He was supposed to hand over control when we turned 21. Marcus got his money at 21. He'd been living off it for years, funding his failed businesses and expensive lifestyle. But me? Dad told me my grandmother left me nothing special. He said I needed to work hard and earn everything myself. I realized Dad had been using my trust fund to supplement the family income for 7 years. He'd been paying himself management, fees, covering Marcus's debts, and even funding family vacations with my money. The apartment I thought I'd struggled to afford? My own trust fund had been making the down payment installments through a complex series of transfers I never knew about. Dad made sure I believed I was barely scraping by while using my own inheritance to keep me dependent. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality shifted? Where everything you believed about your family suddenly felt like a lie? That's exactly what happened to me in that moment. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by financial documents that told a story I never knew existed. My whole life, I'd been told I was the struggling child who needed to work harder. Meanwhile, Marcus was the successful one who deserved family support. The truth was, I'd been financially supporting the family that treated me like a burden. But this discovery was just the beginning. What happened next would test every relationship I thought I understood. To understand how deep this betrayal went, you need to know about my family. We weren't just complicated. We were a masterclass in dysfunction disguised as middle-class respectability. Dad, Robert Chen, is a middle management accountant who always dreamed of being more important than he actually was. He's the kind of man who corrects people's grammar at dinner parties and keeps receipts for 20 years, just in case. My mother, Linda, is his perfect complement. She spent 30 years playing the role of supportive wife while mastering the art of passive-aggressive martyrdom. Every sacrifice she's ever made gets cataloged and referenced in future guilt sessions. Then there's Marcus, my older brother, by 3 years. Golden boy Marcus with his easy smile and expensive taste. He's charismatic enough to convince our parents that his failures are just learning experiences, while my successes are lucky breaks. Growing up, Marcus got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, and the benefit of every doubt. When he crashed, Dad's car at 17, it was an accident that could happen to anyone. When I got a small dent at 19, I paid for repairs myself and endured lectures about responsibility for months. Marcus went to private college while I attended state school with scholarships and part-time jobs. He studied entrepreneurship, while I earned a practical marketing degree. Even our career paths reflected our family roles. His was creative and ambitious, mine was sensible and safe. Our extended family followed the same patterns. Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, always asked Marcus about his exciting ventures while asking me when I'd settle down and give them grandchildren. Uncle Tom would slip Marcus $20 bills at family gatherings while reminding me to be more grateful for my opportunities. The favoritism was so consistent that I internalized it completely. I believed Marcus deserved more because he was naturally special. I thought my role was to work harder to earn the love that came effortlessly to him. Christmas mornings were the worst. Marcus would receive expensive electronics, designer clothes, and experiences like concert tickets or weekend trips. I'd get practical gifts, books, office supplies, and gift cards to grocery stores. When I'd feel hurt, Mom would say, "Grace, you're so practical. You appreciate useful things." I learned to smile and say thank you while swallowing disappointment that felt like broken glass. Family dinners were performances where Marcus's stories took center stage. His college adventures, his business ideas, his social life, everything fascinated our parents. When I shared achievements like getting promoted or receiving recognition at work, the conversation would somehow shift back to Marcus within minutes. "That's nice, dear," Mom would say before turning to Marcus. "Now tell us more about your networking event." I became the responsible one by default. When family emergencies arose, they called me. When someone needed airport pickup at dawn, they assumed I'd do it. When holidays needed organizing, I handled the details while Marcus showed up to receive praise for gracing us with his presence. The financial inequality I discovered was just the tip of an iceberg I'd been swimming around my whole life. But having proof changed everything. Those bank statements weren't just numbers. They were evidence of systematic deception. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, hit that like button. You're not alone in this experience. I realized Dad hadn't just stolen money from me. He'd stolen my understanding of my own worth. By keeping me financially dependent while pretending I was struggling independently, he maintained control over my life choices. Every time I'd considered taking risks, switching careers, traveling, starting my own business, he'd remind me of my limited resources. Meanwhile, he was literally sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars that belonged to me. The apartment situation suddenly made perfect sense. Dad wanted me to sell because he needed access to more of my trust fund. He'd already spent most of what he could legally access. My mortgage was protecting the remaining money from his manipulation. Marcus's new business venture was probably another scheme to drain family resources. But this time, Dad needed me to liquidate real assets because the easy money was running out. I spent sleepless nights processing this revelation. Every family memory reframed itself through this new lens. Every sacrifice I'd made, every opportunity I'd passed up, every time I'd felt guilty for wanting more. It all looked different now. But knowing the truth was just step one. Deciding what to do about it would test me in ways I never imagined. Armed with evidence of years of financial manipulation, I faced a choice that would define the rest of my relationships with my family. But before I could confront them, I needed to understand the full scope of what had been done. I scheduled a meeting with the trust attorney, Margaret Roswell, who had managed my grandmother's estate. She was a sharp woman in her 60s who remembered my grandmother fondly. Your grandmother specifically wanted to ensure both grandchildren had equal opportunities, she explained, spreading documents across her mahogany desk. She was very concerned about favoritism. The irony was crushing. Grandmother had anticipated exactly what happened and tried to prevent it. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Your father assured us he would explain everything when you turned 21. We sent letters to your address, but he said, you'd decided to let him continue managing the funds. I never received any letters. Dad had been intercepting my mail and forging my responses. The depth of deception was breathtaking, but Margaret had more shocking news. There's something else you should know. Your trust has grown significantly over the years, even with your father's management fees. You're worth considerably more than the original inheritance. She handed me a current balance statement. The number made me dizzy. I wasn't just comfortable, I was wealthy. Wealthy enough to buy a house, start a business, or live anywhere I wanted. While processing this information, I discovered another family secret through my cousin Jessica, who worked at the bank where Dad had his accounts. Grace, I probably shouldn't tell you this, Jessica whispered over coffee. But your dad's been struggling financially for months. He took out a second mortgage on your parents' house and borrowed against his retirement. The pieces clicked together. Dad's sudden demand that I sell my apartment wasn't about helping Marcus. It was about saving himself from financial ruin. He'd been using my money to maintain a lifestyle the family couldn't actually afford. Marcus's business ventures weren't the problem. They were the symptom. Dad had been enabling his golden son's failures while living beyond their means for years. Comment below if you've ever discovered a family member was using you financially. Your stories help others feel less alone. I decided to test my family's loyalties before making any major decisions. I told Mom I was considering taking a sabbatical from work to figure out my career direction. Oh, honey, that's not practical, she said immediately. You can't afford to take time off, not like Marcus can. I mentioned wanting to travel, maybe spend a few months in Europe. Don't be silly, Dad interjected. That's a waste of money you don't have. Meanwhile, Marcus announced he was thinking about buying a boat for his water sports business venture. Our parents immediately started brainstorming how to make it happen. The double standard was staggering, but now I understood why. They thought Marcus had family money to fall back on. They believed I was genuinely struggling because they'd hidden my resources from me. I also tested my relationships outside the immediate family. I confided in my best friend Maya about feeling undervalued by my family. "Grace, I've watched this for years," she said gently. "They treat you like hired help at family gatherings. You deserve so much better." Maya's honesty was refreshing after years of family gaslighting. She helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized. How I always hosted holidays but Marcus got thanked. How my achievements got minimized while his potential got celebrated. Then I spoke with my mentor at work, Sarah Kim, who had become like an older sister to me over the years. "You know," Sarah reflected, "you've mentioned money stress constantly, but you live modestly and work hard. I always wondered why you seemed so financially anxious. Everyone outside my family could see what I couldn't, that my supposed limitations weren't real. The anxiety about money, the careful budgeting, the constant worry about affording things, it had all been programmed into me through systematic deception. But the most revealing test came when I mentioned to Aunt Sarah that I might need to borrow money for a car repair. "Oh, sweetie," she said with fake sympathy, "maybe Marcus could help you out. He's doing so well with his investments." She actually suggested I borrow from my own trust fund money that Marcus had access to while I was being kept in artificial poverty. The manipulation wasn't just from my parents. It was family-wide conspiracy of enablement. That conversation was my breaking point. I realized this wasn't about one bad decision or misunderstanding. This was about a family system that required my diminishment to function properly. I spent 2 weeks planning my confrontation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life from people who had been systematically undermining it for years. I decided to host a family dinner at my apartment. I told everyone I had important news to share about my future. Dad probably thought I was finally agreeing to sell the place. Marcus arrived first, looking around my apartment with his usual subtle disdain. "Still cramped in here, huh, sis?" Mom and Dad followed, carrying flowers that felt more like a funeral arrangement than a celebration. Dad immediately started talking about market conditions and how selling now would be financially smart. "Before we discuss my future," I said, placing a folder on the coffee table, "I think we should discuss my past." I opened the folder to reveal bank statements, legal documents, and correspondence from the trust attorney. The silence was deafening. Dad's face went white. "Grace, let me explain." "Explain what, Dad?" "How you've been stealing from me for 7 years. How you convinced me I was poor while sitting on my inheritance. How you made me feel guilty for wanting basic things while funding Marcus's lifestyle with my money?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" I turned to him, feeling something between pity and rage. "You thought your trust fund was bigger than mine, didn't you? You thought grandmother loved you more?" I slid papers across the table showing both trust balances from the original will. Marcus's face crumbled as he realized we'd been given identical amounts. "The difference," I continued, "is that Dad gave you access to your money while convincing me I had nothing. Every business failure you've had, every expensive purchase, every time Mom and Dad bailed you out, it was funded partially by stealing from me." Mom finally found her voice. "Grace, we were protecting you. You're more practical with money." "Protecting me?" My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. "By lying to me? By making me work 60-hour weeks thinking I was barely surviving? By letting me stress about every small expense while my own money was paying for family vacations I felt too guilty to take?" Hit the subscribe button if you believe families should be honest about money. This gets more intense. Dad tried to take control of the conversation. "You're being dramatic, Grace. We've always done what's best for the family." "Best for which family?" I asked. "Because I haven't been treated like family. I've been treated like a resource to be managed and controlled." I pulled out more documents. The intercepted letters, the forged responses, the management fees he'd been paying himself from my account. You've been committing fraud, Dad, for years. Not just financial fraud, but emotional fraud. You made me believe I was the struggling child who needed to be grateful for scraps while I was actually funding your lifestyle. Marcus looked sick. Grace, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But you never questioned it, did you? I asked him. You never wondered why you could afford risks while I had to be practical? You never noticed that family financial emergencies somehow always required my sacrifice but never yours? The room fell silent except for Mom's quiet crying. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught. Dad tried one more manipulation tactic. Fine, you want control of the money? Take it. But don't expect us to support your mistakes when you fail. That's when I delivered the news that changed everything. I already have control, Dad. I met with Margaret Roswell last week. As of today, you're removed as trustee. And there's something else you should know. I stood up and walked to my window overlooking the city. Remember how you demanded I sell this apartment? Well, I did some research into property investments. I handed them a final document. Last month, I used my trust fund to buy the penthouse in this building, the one that just went on the market for $2 million. I'm your new landlord, Dad. This building has been family property for 3 weeks. The shock on their faces was worth years of emotional manipulation. Dad had unknowingly been helping me buy the very building he was trying to force me to leave. The beautiful irony, I continued, is that the management fees you've been stealing from me helped fund the down payment. You literally financed your own loss of control. Marcus started laughing, not from humor, but from the absurdity of the situation. She played us, Dad. She actually played us. But the confrontation wasn't over. The real test was what would happen next. The immediate aftermath of that dinner was chaos. Dad stormed out, shouting about ungrateful children and family loyalty. Mom followed him, but not before delivering her parting shot. You've destroyed this family, Grace. Marcus stayed. He sat on my couch, head in his hands, processing everything that had been revealed. I really didn't know, he said quietly. I mean, I knew I was the favorite, but I didn't realize it was your money making it possible. For the first time in our lives, my brother was being completely honest with me. What happens now? He asked. That depends on what you do with this information, I replied. The next few weeks tested every relationship in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dad hired a lawyer to challenge the trust changes, but Margaret Roswell had documented everything perfectly. His legal case dissolved quickly when faced with evidence of his financial misconduct. Mom tried a different approach. She called me crying, begging me to think about family. But when I offered to discuss rebuilding our relationship based on honesty, she hung up. The extended family reaction was split. Aunt Sarah accused me of being vindictive and tearing the family apart. Uncle Tom, surprisingly, called to apologize for years of treating me differently. I always wondered why your parents kept saying you struggled financially, he admitted. You never acted like someone who was broke. If you're dealing with family members who enable toxic behavior, leave a comment. We need to support each other through these difficult dynamics. Marcus made a choice that surprised everyone, including me. He decided to get a real job, not another entrepreneurial venture, but actual employment with a steady paycheck. I need to know who I am without family money, he told me over coffee 3 months later. I've never actually supported myself. He moved into a modest apartment and started working at a marketing firm similar to mine. For the first time, we began developing a real sibling relationship based on mutual respect rather than family hierarchy. But the biggest changes were in my own life. With access to my full inheritance, I quit my demanding job and started my own consulting business. I hired Maya as my first employee, and we focused on helping small businesses with authentic marketing strategies. The Penthouse became more than just a symbol of financial freedom. I turned part of it into a home office and meeting space. The view from the 15th floor reminded me daily that I was no longer living under anyone else's limitations. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor. Dad showed up at my door, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. I let him in, but I didn't offer him coffee or a comfortable seat. This conversation would happen on my terms. "The house is going into foreclosure," he admitted. "The second mortgage, the credit cards, the loans, it's all collapsing." Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I felt sad. This was the man who had raised me, despite his flaws. Watching him face the consequences of his choices was painful. "I know I can't undo what I did," he continued, "but I need you to understand. Why?" He explained how grandmother's death had triggered a financial crisis for his generation. She'd left the bulk of her estate to grandchildren, not her own children. Dad and his siblings had felt abandoned and resentful. "I convinced myself I was just evening things out," he said. "Your mother and I sacrificed our whole lives for you kids. When Marcus needed help, it felt fair to use your money since you seemed more independent." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from him. "Dad," I said carefully, "feeling overlooked doesn't justify stealing from your own daughter, and it doesn't justify lying to me about my own worth for years." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. I just don't know how to fix it." That conversation marked the beginning of a very slow, very conditional rebuilding process. I agreed to family therapy, but only if he committed to complete financial transparency and took responsibility for his actions. 1 year later, our family looks completely different. But that transformation taught me lessons that changed how I see relationships forever. 1 year later, I'm writing this story from my penthouse office, looking out over a city that no longer feels like a place I'm struggling to survive in. The view reminds me daily that the limitations I thought were real were just walls other people built around me. The family therapy sessions with Dad have been brutal and necessary. We meet twice a month with Dr. Martinez, a therapist who specializes in financial abuse within families. Yes, financial abuse. That's what it was, even though it took me months to accept that term. Dad has made genuine progress. He's acknowledged the systematic nature of his deception and is working to understand how his childhood shaped his relationship with money and control. He's also paying back the money he took, though it will take years to settle completely. Mom's journey has been different. She's struggled more with accepting responsibility for her role in the situation. In therapy, we've discovered that her passive-aggressive behavior was her way of expressing resentment about financial stress she didn't understand was artificially created. But the most profound change has been in my relationship with Marcus. My brother has thrived in his new life of actual independence. He's been promoted twice at his marketing job and recently started dating someone who likes him for who he is, not what he can provide. "You know what's weird?" he told me last month. "I'm happier now than I ever was when everything came easily. I actually respect myself." We've started a tradition of monthly sibling dinners where we're building the relationship we never had, growing up. It's awkward sometimes, learning to be equals after years of hierarchy. But it's real in a way our family interactions never were before. The extended family has largely divided into two camps: those who think I was right to expose the truth, and those who believe I should have handled it privately. I've learned to be okay with both reactions. If you've had to set boundaries with family members, drop a heart in the comments. It's one of the hardest things we ever have to do. My business has grown beyond anything I imagined when I started it. Having financial security allowed me to take risks and be selective about clients. I work with companies that align with my values, and I've been able to hire 3 more employees, all of whom receive equity in the business. But perhaps the most important change is internal. I no longer apologize for taking up space. I don't minimize my achievements or downplay my needs. I've learned the difference between being grateful and being diminished. The apartment that Dad demanded I sell? I kept it as a reminder of who I was during the most difficult period of my life. Sometimes I go back there to remember the woman who thought she had to choose between her family's approval and her own well-being. That woman was doing her best with the information she had. She deserved better than what she was getting, but she didn't know how to ask for it. Now I know that self-advocacy isn't selfish, it's essential. I've also learned that family love isn't automatic or unconditional. Real love requires respect, honesty, and the willingness to see each other as complete individuals rather than roles to be managed. Some of you might be wondering if I regret confronting my family so directly. The answer is no. The truth has consequences, but lies have victims. I was tired of being a victim of other people's stories about my life. To anyone watching this who feels trapped by family expectations or financial manipulation, I want you to know your worth isn't determined by other people's treatment of you. You deserve access to your own resources, your own choices, and your own definition of success. If you're in a similar situation, start by gathering information. Document everything. Find allies outside your family system. And remember that setting boundaries isn't about punishing anyone. It's about protecting yourself. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between family harmony and your own well-being? How did you navigate that decision? Your experiences could help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit subscribe and the notification bell. I share real stories about family dynamics, boundary setting, and personal growth because these conversations matter. We're not alone in these struggles. And if you're ready to stop apologizing for wanting better treatment from the people who are supposed to love you most, remember, you deserve relationships that enhance your life rather than diminish it. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next video.